Welcome to this explainer. Right now, there is an incredibly high-stakes geopolitical puzzle unfolding between the United States, Israel, and Iran. You know, beneath all those daily headlines of missile strikes, there are these massive, entrenched strategic shifts happening that are completely redefining the balance of power in the Middle East. So today, we are going to unpack the underlying motivations that are keeping these three powers totally deadlocked.
Here is our agenda for today. 1. The region's new normal. 2. Iran's risky new strategy. 3. The proxy battlefield. 4. Allied friction. And finally, 5. The strategic deadlock.
Let's jump right into Section 1, the region's new normal.
Okay, to really grasp this, we have to look at the sheer speed of what's happening. In early June, in the span of just a single week, Israel bombed Lebanon. Iran fired missiles at Israel. A U.S. helicopter was downed. The U.S. retaliated, and then, kind of shockingly, diplomatic settlements were claimed. I mean, this dizzying pace of overlapping military action and diplomacy, it's completely unprecedented.
For decades, these nations fought what we call a shadow war. Direct attacks were an absolute taboo, right? Everyone avoided them to prevent regional devastation. Well, that taboo is officially gone. The fact that routine, direct missile strikes are now happening means the margin for error has basically vanished, and it has put global stability on a razor's edge.
Which brings us to Section 2, Iran's risky new strategy.
Historically, Iran was incredibly cautious. They were deeply scarred by that ruinous war with Iraq back in the 1980s. So, their strategy was to use proxy militias as a shield, basically to keep the conflict far away from home. But today, Iran is acting emboldened. They've totally reversed their doctrine. Now they are acting as a physical shield to protect those same proxies, and they are willingly absorbing direct damage to their own territory. It's a massive shift.
Now, Iran claims this new aggression is creating deterrence against Israel. But to see if that's true, we need to strictly define deterrence. It's dissuading an adversary by convincing them that the costs of an action will heavily outweigh the benefits. Keep that definition in your back pocket.
Because Iran's attempt to deter Israel entirely failed that test, here is what happened. Iran warned against an attack on Beirut. Israel ignored the warning and bombed it anyway. So Iran retaliated with missiles, but they caused absolutely no serious damage. Then Israel struck back and crippled a vital Iranian petrochemical plant. So by trying to play the deterrent, Iran actually ended up suffering way more structural damage to its vital energy sector than the adversary it was trying to scare.
Okay, moving on to Section 3, the proxy battlefield.
So why exactly is Iran sticking its neck out for groups outside its borders? Well, it comes down to billions of dollars. Iran has been pouring massive amounts of money into groups like Hezbollah since 1982. This is practically their only mechanism to project serious regional power. Losing that proxy network would basically mean losing their reach across the entire Middle East.
And Iran is walking a seriously dangerous tightrope here. They're using this newfound battlefield risk, these proxy and direct attacks, as leverage to directly impact negotiations with the U.S. They're engaging in periodic low-level attacks, like downing that U.S. Apache helicopter over the Strait of Hormuz to show President Trump that delaying diplomatic concessions carries a constant cost. It's a profound gamble. I mean, downing the chopper didn't necessarily force Trump's hand, but if American pilots had been killed, that could have easily triggered an all-out war.
Let's look at Section 4, Allied friction, specifically between the United States and Israel. Publicly, President Trump is pushing really hard for a diplomatic deal to end hostilities, and the reason is clear. The recent conflict blockaded the Strait of Hormuz, causing a massive spike in global energy prices, and that directly impacts the cost of practically everything we buy. The U.S. desperately wants to stabilize that economic threat. But privately, the relationship is incredibly fraught. According to the source material, President Trump directed an intensely critical, expletive-laden remark at Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This friction stems from a complete strategic deadlock. The U.S. wants an immediate ceasefire, while Israel repeatedly defies U.S. pressure, continuing their strikes to degrade their enemies. This dynamic is so intense that it actually led the U.S. to freeze Israel out of ongoing negotiations brokered by Pakistan. Trump even claimed to the Financial Times that Netanyahu would just have to accept whatever deal the U.S. reaches, saying he calls all the shots. Yet Israel kept launching strikes anyway, right up until a direct phone call from the U.S. president finally forced them to abort.
Complicating matters even more for Israel is a historic shift happening right here in the U.S.
According to a recent Gallup poll, 41% of Americans now sympathize with Palestinians, compared to 36% for Israelis. That is a huge deal. For the first time in 2 decades, sympathy for Palestinians is higher. And this drop in Israeli support spans across both partisan and generational lines, which gives the U.S. administration far less domestic pressure to back Israel's campaigns unconditionally.
And while the U.S. wants to pause, Prime Minister Netanyahu faces a ticking clock. He has an October election looming, and he's facing intense domestic criticism for a lack of decisive war results. I mean, Hamas still controls parts of Gaza, Hezbollah can still launch rockets, and Iran's nuclear and missile programs are completely intact. So Israel feels an existential and political imperative to keep battering these threats, which puts them on a direct collision course with America's diplomatic goals.
This brings us to our final section, Section 5, the strategic deadlock.
When we map out the goals of all 3 actors, it's like a giant puzzle where every single piece blocks another. The U.S. wants a lasting diplomatic deal, but they are obstructed by Israel's strikes and Iran's attacks. Israel wants to neutralize threats like Hezbollah, but they are blocked by U.S. pressure for a ceasefire. Iran wants to coerce the U.S. and deter Israel, but their limited military capabilities just result in them taking heavy infrastructure damage. Everyone's primary goal is completely blocked by the other 2. It is a complete stalemate. As we wrap up this explainer, we really have to look at the massive gamble Iran is taking with this newfound confidence. They are playing a high-stakes game of chicken with 2 vastly superior militaries. Betting that the U.S.'s reluctance for an all-out war gives them the cover they need to launch proxy attacks. But the question is, can they actually sustain this?
Ultimately, Iran faces a really severe trade-off here. The short-term gain? It buys them leverage at Trump's negotiating table. The short-term risk? It provokes devastating retaliation against their vital infrastructure. But the long-term risk? It's existential. By continually stoking direct conflict, Iran jeopardizes the survival of the very thing it has spent decades trying to protect, its cherished nuclear and missile programs. Iran might act like a regime with nothing left to lose right now, but if this deadlock shatters into a full-scale war, will their aggressive new posture end up costing them their ultimate prize? Thanks so much for joining this explainer. Keep questioning the headlines, and we'll see you next time.